For 300 years, the Vorathaians had owned the stars. This wasn't just a boast. It was a cold, hard fact that every single species in the galaxy knew. Their empire stretched across 2,000 star systems, enforced by tens of thousands of warships. When the Vorathaians wanted something, they took it. When they gave an order, you obeyed. That's just how the universe worked. The Galactic Council, this huge assembly on a station floating in the void, was supposed to be about diplomacy. But with 47 species gathered there, everyone knew the truth. It was just a fancy stage to make the Vorathaians' demands sound like polite requests. They'd argue and debate, sure, but when the vote came, the result was always the same. Any planet that dared to step out of line found itself choked by sanctions, blockades, or something much, much worse. The Vorathaian in charge, High Chancellor Vexith, was a terrifying figure. His people looked something like us, but their skin was thick and gray like granite. Their eyes had this soft, creepy red glow, and their voices rumbled like a distant thunderstorm. Vexith's chair was the biggest in the room, set on a platform above everyone else. That wasn't official protocol or anything, but nobody was dumb enough to complain. And today, Vexith had called them all for a special announcement. The other delegates sat in their seats, a nervous buzz filling the giant chamber. Some whispered to each other, while others just stared straight ahead, trying to look brave. But they all had that sinking feeling in their stomachs. They knew what this was probably about. The Vorathaians had found themselves a new toy. "Honorable members of the Council," Vexith's voice boomed across the room without needing a microphone. "The Empire has discovered something new, something that will benefit every species under our protection. Our scouts have mapped a new world on the galaxy's outer edge. Our computers call it Sol 3, but its primitive locals have a different name for it: Earth." The delegates all shifted in their seats, leaning forward just a tiny bit. A new world meant new resources, new workers, and a whole lot of new money flowing right into the Empire's pockets. Of course, if a species was extra obedient, they might get a few table scraps. "Our first scans," Vexith continued, "show a planet rich in minerals and crawling with life, and more importantly, it's home to a species that calls itself human. Our intelligence team just finished their report, and to be honest, the results are hilarious." He waved a hand, and a massive hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber. It showed a beautiful blue and green planet with swirling white clouds orbiting a yellow sun. Then it zoomed in, showing cities, cars, and the people themselves. "As you can see," Vexith said with a smirk, "the humans are laughably primitive. They've just barely started to dip their toes into space. Their fastest ships still use chemical combustion. Can you believe it? Chemical combustion. That's like using a canoe to cross an ocean. They think landing a couple of their people on their own moon is some kind of historic achievement." A few nervous chuckles echoed from the delegates. Chemical rockets were ancient tech, the kind of thing you'd find in a museum, not powering a starship. It was like discovering a lost tribe that was still amazed by fire. "And get this," Vexith added, "the humans don't even have one single government. They're split into almost 200 different groups, and most of them are busy fighting each other over patches of dirt, resources, and dumb ideas. Their most powerful weapons are these primitive atom splitters, things they call nuclear bombs. I suppose they're good for blowing each other up, but they're totally useless against modern energy shields." More pictures flashed in the hologram: busy human cities, tiny, fragile-looking spaceships. To all the advanced races in that room, the humans looked like toddlers playing with blocks. "The Empire has decided," Vexith announced, his voice dropping, "that Sol 3 and its entire system will be absorbed into our territory. The humans will get one chance to surrender and serve the Empire. If they say no, then we'll proceed with standard military action. Fleet Admiral Kreth has been assigned to lead the 7th Subjugation Fleet for this mission." A hologram of the Admiral appeared next to the image of Earth. Kreth was even bigger than Vexith, his armor covered in metals from centuries of crushing other worlds. His red eyes burned with a fire that was a trademark of his genetically engineered combat skills. Kreth had personally forced 9 civilizations to their knees. He had never lost. The Seventh Fleet is made up of 847 warships, Vexith said, plain and simple. That includes 6 dreadnoughts, 42 battleships, 150 cruisers, and all the support ships we need. Now, the usual procedure for a world that hasn't even figured out faster-than-light travel is about 100 ships. However, Admiral Kreth asked for the extra firepower to make a lasting impression. We want the humans to understand right away and with zero doubt that fighting back is not an option. The delegate from Thaxia, a small insect-like creature, nervously raised a claw. "Hi, Chancellor. Forgive me, but is a fleet that big really necessary for a species like this? It seems like a bit much." Vexith's glowing red eyes snapped to the Thaxian, who immediately lowered its arm. "The size of the fleet isn't just about what we need, delegate," Vexith growled. "It's about sending a message to everyone. The Empire's power has no limits. Our resources are endless. We can throw almost 1,000 warships at one little primitive planet because we have tens of thousands more just sitting around. Let this be a lesson to all of you." The Thaxian delegate practically melted back into its chair. The message was loud and clear. The Voratheians could crush anyone with sheer numbers alone, even an enemy that was absolutely no threat at all. "The operation will begin in 3 standard weeks," Vexith went on. "The Seventh Fleet is gathering at Staging Point Gamma. Admiral Kreth expects the entire takeover to be finished in less than one of Earth's days. The humans will see our fleet fill their ski, they will hear our terms, and they will surrender. If they're stupid enough to fight, their entire military will be wiped out in a matter of hours. After that, we begin our standard integration protocols." And every single person in that room knew what standard integration protocols really meant. The humans would be disarmed. Their planet would be stripped of its resources and taxed into poverty. Their people would become cheap labor for the Empire's massive projects. Their culture would only be allowed to exist if it didn't bother their new Voratheian masters. In a single generation, Earth would become just another cog in the Imperial machine, its people just another nameless, faceless workforce for their overlords. "This council session is now open," Vexith declared. "All of you will be given a live feed from the Seventh Fleet's mission. The Admiral has generously agreed to broadcast the whole thing, so the galaxy can see Voratheian efficiency in action. I expect every single one of you to watch, and to make sure your homeworlds are watching too. Let it remind you of our strength and how completely stupid it is to resist." With that, Vexith turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving the delegates in a stunned, heavy silence. Then, one by one, they got up and shuffled out, heading back to their quarters to report the news. In a quiet hallway, the Thaxian delegate caught up with the representative from Draxus, a big, furry, wolf-like creature. "Do you think they have any idea?" the Thaxian whispered. "The humans. Do they have any clue what's coming for them?" The Draxian shook its massive head. How could they? They barely even know for sure that anyone else is out here. For decades, they've been shooting radio waves into the darkness, just hoping someone would answer. Well, an answer is on its way, and it's the worst one they could possibly imagine. "I almost feel bad for them," the Thaxian murmured. "Listening to their old broadcasts, they sound so full of hope. They talk about peace, about different species working together for the greater good." "Then they're fools," the Draxian replied, though his voice was laced with a hint of sadness. "The galaxy isn't some happy family. It's a food chain. The Voratheians are at the top, and the rest of us are just trying not to get eaten. That's the cold, hard truth. The humans are about to get a very painful lesson in how things really work." "Well, at least they might survive," the Thaxian said, trying to find a silver lining. "The Voratheians don't usually wipe out a species if they give up right away. If the humans are smart, they'll just surrender." "Maybe," the Draxian rumbled. "But I've looked at their history. Humans are a stubborn species. They fight each other constantly. but they have this crazy, irrational pride. They might do something really stupid. They might actually try to fight back. Then they'll be erased, the Thaxian said with a sigh. 847 Vorithaean warships against chemical rockets and atomic bombs. It wasn't going to be a war. It was going to be pest control. The two delegates went their separate ways. All over the station, people were having the same conversation. A few felt a little sorry for the humans, but most of them were just glad the Empire's hungry eyes were pointed at someone else. Imagine being forced to watch a bully pick on someone 100 times smaller, knowing that if you step in, you're next. That's how dozens of alien species felt, a knot of rage twisting in their guts as they watched the feed. But they knew speaking up was a death sentence. Miles above them, in a heavily armored command center reserved for the Vorithaean elite, High Chancellor Vexith was in a holographic call with Admiral Kreth. Kreth's shimmering, larger-than-life image filled the room. Vexith reported, "The Council has been informed. They'll be watching, as required by law." A few grumbled about feeling sorry for the humans, but not one dared to vote against the annexation. "As expected," Kreth sneered. "They're terrified of us, and that's how it should be. Have you reviewed my battle plans?" "I have. The fleet you've gathered seems excessive." "I approved your request for extra ships because your reasoning was solid," Vexith clarified. "This entire operation must be a demonstration of overwhelming, soul-crushing power. Let the whole galaxy tune in and learn what happens to species that can't contribute their fair share." Kreth gave a sharp nod. "The 7th Fleet will arrive in the Sol system in exactly 3 weeks. We'll drop out of hyperspace right next to their 4th planet, a dusty rock they call Mars. From there, we'll issue our standard ultimatum in all their main languages. I've looked into their technology. They have this primitive little network called the Internet that links their whole world. We're going to hijack it and blast our message to every single screen they own all at once." Vexith leaned in, intrigued. "And how do you predict they will react?" "Utter and complete panic," Kreth said, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Their governments will be falling all over themselves to contact us. It'll be pure chaos as they argue and point fingers. A few might puff out their chests and want to fight, but their generals will realize pretty quickly they don't have a prayer. I'd say we give them 6 hours, tops, before they beg to surrender." "And if they refuse?" Vexith prodded. "If they refuse," Kreth went on, "we start vaporizing their military bases one by one. They'll cave after we turn a few into craters." "And if they're still feeling stubborn after that?" Kreth's eyes took on a dark, hungry glow. "Then we begin orbital bombardment of their largest cities. Trust me, one city turned to ash will be enough. They'll give up on the spot. Humans are pathetically emotional. Our psychological profiles show they would never sacrifice their own civilians for a war they know they can't possibly win." "Excellent. Just remember, Admiral," Vexith cautioned, "the entire galaxy is watching this. Keep it clean, keep it quick, and make it absolutely horrifying. I want every species watching to be reminded that the Empire is invincible." "Consider it done, High Chancellor," Kreth confirmed with a salute. "The 7th Fleet will bring nothing but glory to the Empire. As for the humans, they'll be a forgotten footnote in our grand history. Just another primitive race that learned its place as kneeling before Vorithaean power." The hologram vanished, leaving Vexith alone in the quiet room. He walked over to a massive viewport, staring out at the infinite ocean of stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, the human race was living out their daily lives, totally unaware that their fate had just been sealed. In just 3 short weeks, their entire world would be turned upside down. Vexith felt no guilt, not even a flicker. To him, the galaxy was a simple place. The strong dominate the weak, the intelligent control the simple-minded. The Empire took whatever it wanted for one simple reason, because it could. It was just the law of the jungle, writ large across the stars. The humans were about to get a painful lesson, and the rest of the galaxy would be taking notes, remembering why you never, ever challenge the Empire. 3 weeks. That was all the time Earth had left. The Vorithaean 7th Fleet ripped a hole in reality, pouring out of hyperspace like a dark poison spreading across the cosmos. 847 warships materialized near Mars, their obsidian hulls swallowing the light of the distant sun. Every ship was a predator, built for one thing: destruction. Their smallest vessels were the size of a human aircraft carrier. Their largest dreadnought stretched over 5 kilometers long, bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. On the bridge of the flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kreth watched the red sphere of Mars grow on the main view screen as his fleet slid into a perfect, menacing formation. All around him, Vorathaean officers moved with the calm, practiced precision of a machine built for conquest. The bridge itself felt more like a cathedral of war, with ceilings soaring 20 meters high and walls covered in streams of tactical data. "Fleet formation is locked, Admiral," the tactical officer reported. "All ships report green across the board. The jump was clean." "Scan the system," Kreth ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know the location of every human ship, satellite, and space rock. No surprises." The sensor officer's fingers danced across her console, aiming the fleet's formidable sensor arrays at the third planet from the sun. "Scanning now, Admiral. Initial pings are showing a cloud of artificial satellites around their home world, mostly primitive communications and weather monitoring. We're also detecting chemical rocket launches from the surface. Looks like routine trips to a tiny orbital station. No military craft detected outside their planet's atmosphere." Kreth nodded, a smug smirk touching his lips. It was exactly as their intelligence had predicted. The humans had barely waded into the cosmic ocean with a dinky little space station and no real navy. They had no patrols, no early warning systems beyond those primitive satellites. They were completely oblivious to any threat that came from beyond their own moon. "Open a channel to the Galactic Council," Kreth commanded. "Broadcast on all public frequencies. Let them all witness this glorious moment." Across the galaxy, on the Central Council Station and on the home worlds of 47 member species, screens came to life. Trillions of beings were now watching the Vorathaean fleet hanging in the dark, a silent promise of destruction. In the Great Council Hall, delegates shifted in their seats, ready for what they assumed would be a quick, brutal spectacle. "Channel is live, Admiral," the comms officer confirmed. "Attention, inhabitants of Earth," Kreth began, his voice booming as the ship's computers translated it into 17 of Earth's most common languages in real time. "I am Fleet Admiral Kreth of the Vorathaean Empire. Your world has been selected for annexation. You are to immediately cease all military activity and prepare to receive our occupation forces. You have 6 hours to broadcast your unconditional surrender. Comply, and your people will be peacefully absorbed into our glorious empire. We will protect you, guide you, and put your world to productive use. But if you resist, we will deliver total annihilation. You cannot win. You cannot escape. Your only choice is to decide how you will survive. Obey and live. Resist and be erased. You have 6 hours." The message ended. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the officers shared expectant glances. Their intelligence brief suggested it would take at least an hour for the humans to even digest the message. They anticipated panic signals, mass confusion, maybe even pleas for more time. The actual response arrived in 2 minutes. It was a single audio transmission, no video, from someone identifying themselves as NORAD Combined Space Command. The voice was a human male, speaking English in a steady, almost casual tone. "Yeah, that's going to be a no from us. Maintain your current position beyond lunar orbit, or you will be fired upon. This is your one and only warning. NORAD out." For a full 10 seconds, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was utterly silent. Officers just stared at each other, completely baffled. Then, Admiral Kreth began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the massive command center. "Did you hear that?" he roared, gesturing at his crew. "They just threatened us! A species that still uses glorified fireworks to get into orbit just threatened the Vorathaean Empire. They warned us!" He laughed again, even harder this time. "I have brought 9 civilizations to their knees. I have personally ordered worlds to be turned into glass. And these These insects think they can fire upon us? Across the galaxy, the reaction was stunned silence. In the council chamber, delegates looked around nervously. The Thaxian ambassador leaned toward his Draxian colleague. They said no. In 2 minutes, they didn't even have a meeting. They're insane, the Draxian whispered back, or they have no clue what they're dealing with. On the Eternal Dominion, Kreth's laughter choked off, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. Communications, he barked. Send a message back. Tell them they just made the single greatest mistake in their short, insignificant history. Tell them we are advancing on their world and will now accept nothing less than their immediate and total surrender. Anything less will result in their extinction. Yes, Admiral, the officer began, but Kreth held up a hand. Actually, forget it. No more talking. Words are wasted on animals. All ships advance on Earth. Bombardment formation. It's time to teach these humans what defiance actually costs. The colossal fleet moved as one. 847 warships surged toward the small blue planet, a perfect, disciplined wall of death. The massive dreadnoughts formed the core, shielded by layers of battleships and cruisers, with nimble destroyers racing ahead as a deadly screen. It was the perfect setup for steamrolling a weaker enemy, a textbook case of shock and awe. What's our time to Earth's orbit? Admiral Kreth barked. At this speed, 43 minutes, Admiral. Perfect, he smirked. Keep all sensors on maximum. If these humans are foolish enough to pop off one of their little firecrackers at us, I want to see it coming. But just then, the sensor officer's voice cut through the air, sharp and panicked. Admiral, we have contacts everywhere. Hundreds, no, wait, thousands of new signatures are appearing all over the system. What? Kreth marched to the sensor station. Where did they pop up from? Did they use FTL? That's impossible. They don't have that tech. The officer, her eyes wide with fear, stammered, No FTL signatures, Admiral. They were already here, hiding. They're dropping some kind of stealth field. They were all around us, sir. Literally everywhere. Hidden in the asteroid belt, lurking out by the gas giants, even tucked away in Mars's orbit. We were caught in a box, and we never even knew the lid was closing. On the main screen, the tactical map was erupting. Little red dots blinked into existence. First a few dozen, then hundreds more. Each one was a ship of a completely unknown design, positioned throughout our solar system in what could only be described as a perfectly laid trap. Across the galaxy, other species watched the feed in total shock. The Thaxian delegate leaped from his seat. How is this possible? Our spies said they didn't have a deep space fleet. Kreth just stared, his mind scrambling. Analysis, what are we looking at? What are these ships capable of? The reply was chilling. Unknown, Admiral. They're not in any of our databases. Their energy signatures are bizarre. They don't match any known engine. It seems to be some kind of reaction drive, but the power output is off the charts. Way more advanced than a pre-lightspeed species should have. Sir, they're running cold, almost zero heat signature. That's how they snuck right by our long-range scans. Give me a head count now, Kreth demanded. We're still counting, sir. We're at 437 contacts. Hold on. It's now 612. More are dropping their cloaking fields as we speak. 600 ships against their 800. The odds were still on their side, but this was a nightmare compared to what they'd been told to expect. These humans weren't just some primitive race taking their first steps into space. They had been waiting. They had been preparing for this. Sir, we're getting a message from Earth, the communications officer said. On screen, Kreth commanded. The same cold, robotic voice they'd heard before from NORAD filled the bridge. Vorathion Fleet, you were told to maintain your position outside lunar orbit. You have now entered our defensive zone. You will immediately withdraw to a position beyond the orbit of Mars, or we will open fire. You have 60 seconds to comply. Kreth's hands clenched into tight fists. Withdraw? They have the nerve to order us to retreat? Lock every weapon on the closest human ship. All vessels, on my signal, get ready to fire. We're about to teach these upstarts what happens when you threaten the Empire. The tactical officer spoke carefully. Admiral, I strongly suggest caution. We have no idea what their capabilities are. Maybe we should... Silence, Kreth roared. "We are the Vorathaean Empire. We don't show caution to primitives. We don't back down from anyone. All ships target the human fleet and fire at will." The Vorathaean fleet unleashed a storm. A torrent of energy weapons lit up the void, with thousands of plasma bolts screaming toward the human ships. It was the kind of overwhelming power that shattered planets and turned fleets into dust. But the human ships just moved. They didn't glide or turn like normal spacecraft. They moved in short, violent bursts, their engines firing in sharp, unpredictable patterns. The Vorathaean targeting systems, which were designed to track predictable flight paths, couldn't get a lock. 90% of their shots flew right past them into empty space. The few shots that did connect slammed into the human ships, and their shields flared. But they weren't energy shields like the Vorathaeans used. It was something else. It looked like layers of armor that boiled away under the heat, sacrificing the outer shell to protect the ship inside. It was a crude, almost primitive solution, but it was working. "They're breaking formation, sir," the tactical officer reported. "They're flying erratically. Our targeting computers can't keep up." And then the humans shot back. The first shot came from a ship that had been hiding in the shadow of Mars. It wasn't a laser or a plasma cannon. It was something much simpler and 1,000 times more horrifying. It was a solid block of metal, fired by electromagnetic rails at 30% of the speed of light. A kinetic kill weapon, just a dense slug moving at an insane velocity. It hit the lead dreadnought, the glorious Conquest, right in the center. The ship's shields, designed to stop energy, did nothing against a solid object moving that fast. The projectile blasted through the shields like they were made of glass. It tore through 2 kilometers of armor plating, ripped through deck after deck, and slammed into the reactor core deep inside the ship. The glorious Conquest just fell apart. Its reactor went critical, exploding in a silent, brilliant flash of light so bright it could be seen from Earth. 5,000 Vorathaean soldiers were gone in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion crippled 2 other cruisers nearby. On the council station, the delegates just stared at their screens in absolute horror. The Draxian delegate whispered, "They destroyed a dreadnought with 1 shot. How?" But the humans didn't give them a moment to recover. More kinetic slugs fired from hidden positions all over the solar system. They were cheap, simple pieces of metal, but at those speeds, they were unstoppable. Vorathaean shields were useless. Vorathaean armor was like tissue paper. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being ripped to shreds by weapons the rest of the galaxy would have laughed at. "Evasive maneuvers," Kreth screamed. "All ships, scatter! Break formation! We have to dodge these things!" But the humans had planned for that too. As the Vorathaean fleet broke apart in a panic, the human ships charged forward, closing the distance. And when they got closer, they unleashed a whole new set of weapons, missiles that could change direction on a dime, defying the laws of physics. Warheads carrying nuclear payloads that detonated right against Vorathaean hulls. Lasers, powered by contained atomic blasts that sliced through armor in close-range dogfights. "They're on top of us!" the sensor officer screamed. "Sir, they're using the wreckage of our own ships as cover. They're hiding in the debris fields and ambushing us." Kreth watched in pure terror as his glorious fleet was being taken apart piece by piece. The humans fought like no one he'd ever encountered. They had no honor, no formations, no tactics he could possibly predict. They attacked from crazy angles, used decoys and electronic warfare to create chaos, and even sacrificed their own small ships to draw fire while their bigger ships lined up perfect kill shots. "Order a retreat," Kreth finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "All ships fall back to Mars orbit. We need to regroup and, sir, our hyperspace drives are being jammed. The humans are blocking our FTL." "What? That's impossible. They shouldn't have that technology." "Maybe so, sir, but we can't jump. Any ship that tries is getting nothing but critical error messages." And in that single, horrifying moment, Kreth finally understood. The humans had been listening. They had studied Vorathaean tech, analyzed their transmissions, and built weapons specifically designed to exploit every single one of their weaknesses. They were trapped. trapped in a system with an enemy they had written off as helpless prey. The battle became a brutal, horrifyingly efficient slaughter. Every species in the galaxy watched, and their entire idea of what humanity was shattered with every passing moment. It was timestamp 0. The Voratheian fleet, now just a panicked mess of ships, was desperately trying to form a new battle line. Admiral Kreth's orders were screaming across every channel, begging his ships to get back into standard defensive formations. But standard tactics were completely useless. The humans had been studying Voratheian strategy for 40 years. They had watched every public recording of every battle the Empire had ever fought. They knew what Kreth was going to do before the thought even entered his head. Human ships swarmed in from all directions. Ships that had been powered down in the asteroid belt for years roared to life and raced toward the battle. Platforms that had been disguised as dead satellites near Jupiter revealed themselves to be massive gun emplacements. Ships that had been literally buried under the ice of Saturn's rings broke free from their camouflage and joined the fight. The humans had turned their entire home system into one giant deadly mousetrap, and the Voratheians had flown right into it. At timestamp 247, the Voratheian battleship Pride of Empire finally got a kill, destroying a human frigate with a focused blast of plasma. The small ship broke apart, its crew of 200 lost as their ship vented into the void. For a split second, Kreth felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe they could still win this. On paper, the Voratheians should have crushed them. They had more ships, bigger guns, everything. The humans were just a nuisance, relying on a surprise attack that was doomed to fail. Or so they thought. Suddenly, 6 human destroyers ghosted out from behind the burning husk of their own frigate. It clicked into place a second too late. The ship hadn't been lost. It was bait, dangled out there to make the Empire's flagship, the Pride of Empire, reveal its position. The moment it fired, human targeting computers had it cold. The 6 destroyers fired in perfect unison, not with energy beams, but with a flood of missiles. Dozens from each ship, a swarm of over 100 warheads converging on a single spot in space. The Pride of Empire's point defense cannons desperately tried to shoot them down, but it wasn't even close. A series of nuclear blasts blossomed silently against the battleship's hull, shattering its shields and ripping its armor open like a tin can. The very last missile slipped through the chaos and found its way deep into the ship's reactor core. The Pride of Empire simply vanished in a blinding flash, taking its 4 escort cruisers with it in the blast wave. The smaller ships were sent tumbling away, dead and broken. Billions of light years away, species that had lived in fear of the Voratheians watched the broadcast, torn between sheer terror and a dark sense of satisfaction. The Taxian delegate gripped his chair with all 4 of his hands, his eyes wide. The Draxian beside him was trembling. "They're using strategies we couldn't even imagine," he whispered. The Draxian observer just couldn't process what he was seeing. "How's that possible?" he mumbled. "Every ship is acting independently, but they're moving as one. There's no flagship coordinating them, no single command ship to target. It's like they're all connected." He was right. What looked like chaos to the aliens was actually a perfectly choreographed dance of death. Every single human ship, weapon, and sensor was linked into a single massive network. They saw with a million eyes, their computers crunching data as one mind, systematically taking the enemy fleet apart. It was a hive mind of light and steel, turning a scattered collection of ships into one lethal superorganism. At timestamp 512, it finally sank in for Admiral Kree. He wasn't fighting a band of disorganized rebels. He was up against an enemy that had spent generations preparing for this exact moment. Every weapon they used was designed specifically to counter Voratheian technology. Every maneuver they made exploited a strategic weakness he thought was a closely guarded secret. "All vessels retreat!" Kree's voice, once so full of command, was now just a panicked rasp. "Fall back to Mars and spool up the hyperspace drives." His fleet scrambled to obey, turning tail and burning their engines for open space. But a hyperspace jump isn't instantaneous. The ship's computers need a full 30 seconds to calculate a safe route. 30 seconds to plot a course that wouldn't fly them straight into a star. 30 seconds where they had to fly in a straight, predictable line for the jump to work. And the humans knew it. The Voratheians had bragged about their rapid deployment tech in public broadcasts for years. The humans hadn't just watched the commercials, they had built their entire strategy around that tiny 30-second window of absolute vulnerability. The second a Voratheian ship steadied itself for a jump, a storm of human missiles would scream towards it. Every single ship trying to escape became a priority target. Kinetic slugs, nuclear warheads, and laser beams slammed into the helpless vessels, turning them into expanding clouds of fire or sending them spinning off into the void with their escape routes destroyed. "We can't escape and we can't fight them!" the tactical officer shrieked, his voice breaking. "Sir, they're just picking us off. We've lost 43 ships in the last minute." Admiral Cray could only stare at his tactical display as the red icons of his fleet blinked out, one by one by one. This was meant to be a simple demonstration of power, an easy victory. Instead, it was an execution. At timestamp 833, the Voratheian cruiser Infinite Victory finally scored a hit, vaporizing a human frigate that got too bold. A grim smile touched the lips of its captain, Threxus. Finally, they could still fight back. That small moment of victory lasted precisely 4 seconds. 6 human destroyers, which had been feigning a retreat, suddenly whipped around and charged. They'd sacrificed another one of their own ships as bait, a trick that was somehow still working. The humans simply didn't value their ships the way the Voratheians did. To them, a ship was just a bullet, completely expendable if it took out a more valuable enemy. It was a cold, brutal calculation that horrified the Voratheians, whose entire culture was built on military honor and the glory of individual warships. The destroyers opened fire at point-blank range. The Infinite Victory and its 3 escorts were torn to pieces from all sides at once, their shields collapsing, armor melting, and reactors going critical. In less than a minute, 4 more Voratheian warships were gone, their flaming debris adding to the growing scrapyard that was now orbiting Earth. Across the galaxy, the species watching the live feed were finally starting to understand. This wasn't a battle. It was a statement. Humanity was proving that having the fanciest tech in the galaxy means nothing if you don't have the stomach to use it properly. The Voratheians had bigger ships and more powerful guns, but the humans had a smarter plan, better training, and an absolutely terrifying willingness to sacrifice whatever it took to win. At timestamp 1109, Admiral Kree's own flagship, the Eternal Dominion, took a direct hit to the bridge. A kinetic slug fired from a human battleship struck the dreadnought right where human spies had said the command center would be. The projectile, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, ripped through 30 meters of reinforced armor before its small nuclear warhead went off deep inside the command deck. Admiral Cray had just enough time to understand. He saw the ceiling buckle and tear apart. He saw his officers thrown about the room like rag dolls. He saw fire erupt from the consoles as the main view screen cracked, violently sucking the air from his lungs. His final words, broadcast on an open channel for the entire galaxy to hear, were a choked scream of pure, unadulterated rage. "How? You savages!" And then the Eternal Dominion's reactor core blew. The flagship that had put down 9 rebellions, the ship that had laid waste to entire worlds, the vessel they called Indestructible, shattered into 3 massive chunks and countless smaller pieces. Admiral Cray and his crew of 12,000 were gone. The death of the flagship threw the rest of the Voratheian fleet into absolute chaos. With no one left to give orders, it was every ship for itself. Some tried to fight, some tried to run, and a few just gave up, broadcasting desperate pleas for mercy. The humans responded only with weapons fire. This was never a fight for territory. This was pest control. Every last Voratheian ship was a target. And the human fleet was not going to stop until every last one was a drifting wreck. There would be no prisoners, no survivors to tell the tale, and no witnesses besides the shocked alien races watching from light years away. At timestamp 1322, a tiny Vorithian scout ship, the Swift Messenger, managed to punch through the fighting. Its captain was a young officer named Keyleth, and he was piloting the fastest ship in the fleet. Scout ships were designed to run, not fight. Keyleth redlined the engines, pushing them far past their safety limits as he streaked for the edge of the solar system, trying to get far enough from the sun's gravity to make a clean jump to hyperspace. He was so close, he was actually going to make it. The human ships were all tied up with bigger threats, too far away to give chase. Just a couple more minutes, and he would be home free. He would be the one to warn the Empire that humanity was a sleeping giant, that this invasion was a trap, and that every assumption they'd made about these so-called primitives was catastrophically wrong. And then, a single human ship appeared on his sensors, accelerating from behind the moons of Saturn at a speed that was flat out impossible. No ship should be able to move that fast. The G-forces alone would turn any living crew into a red paste. It was pulling off maneuvers that would snap a pilot's spine. In that final, horrifying moment, Keyleth finally understood. The ship chasing him had no crew. It was a drone, guided by an artificial intelligence capable of feats no organic pilot could ever endure, and it was faster than he was. The drone caught up to the Swift Messenger at timestamp 1358. It didn't bother with missiles or lasers. It simply rammed the scout ship at an unbelievable velocity, its armored nose tearing straight through the engine block. Both ships vaporized in a silent flash, two more pieces of junk in the graveyard of space. But just an instant before the impact, Keyleth had managed to broadcast one last frantic message. A final desperate message screamed out on an emergency channel, a data scream that would take years to crawl back to the Vorithian homeworld. But it would get there. The warning was short, chilling, and clear. Earth is not what we thought. They were ready. They were waiting. The fleet is gone. For the love of the Empire, do not come here. I repeat, do not come here. At 1400 hours, the last Vorithian vessel, a crippled frigate hiding behind Mars, blinked on a sensor screen. A volley of missiles erased it from existence. The captain never even got the chance to whisper, "We surrender." Human computers had simply run the numbers. The damaged ship had a chance to repair its drive and escape. So it was flagged for immediate termination. And just like that, the war was over. 4 hours ago, 847 Vorithian warships had stormed into our solar system. Now, there was nothing left but dust and echoes. The human fleet lost 63 ships, every single one a calculated sacrifice, a pawn traded for a queen. The final score was almost unbelievable, a kill ratio of over 13-1. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, delegates from 1,000 worlds watched in absolute stunned silence. The battle feeds were dark, replaced by silent images of floating scrap where an armada used to be. The Vorithian delegate was a statue in his chair, his crimson eyes wide and vacant. Can you imagine? Being the baddest bully in the schoolyard for 3 centuries, only to get knocked out in a single punch by the quiet kid in the back of the class. Finally, a Thaxian delegate broke the spell, his voice a dry rasp. The Vorithian Empire. They've reigned for 300 years. They've crushed 17 civilizations and never lost a single major battle. And a species we all dismissed as primitives just wiped their entire navy off the map in 14 minutes. A grim-faced Draxian delegate turned to him. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low. "This didn't take 14 minutes. This started 40 years ago, the second humanity first heard our radio signals. They've been preparing for this day ever since. They had built their weapons in secret, trained their soldiers in the dark, and turned their entire solar system into one giant hidden fortress. And then they waited. They let the galaxy write them off as harmless, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Suddenly, a new message hijacked every screen in the chamber, overriding all channels. It was broadcast on every frequency, instantly translated into every known language. The face of a human woman appeared, She introduced herself as Representative Chen, and her words were as simple as they were bone-chilling. "Earth is closed," she said flatly. "Any ship entering our territory will be destroyed. No negotiations, no warnings. We don't want anything from you. We won't take anything from you. Stay out of our home, and we'll stay out of yours. But if you come looking for a fight, you will meet the same fate as the Vorithians. This is your first and only warning." The transmission ended, plunging the galaxy into a silence thick with a terrifying new reality. Humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage, not with a handshake, but with a tidal wave of brutal, efficient violence. The council chamber was overflowing. It had never been this packed. Every species had sent their top diplomats, their sharpest generals. They all had the same burning question: what in the stars just happened? And the fear that hung in the air: are we next? These humans just took apart the most powerful military in the galaxy in less time than it takes to eat lunch. What else were they hiding? High Chancellor Vexith stood, but his usual commanding aura was gone. He didn't look powerful, he looked rattled. The myth of Vorithian invincibility was dead, and everyone in that room was standing at its funeral. "The Council recognizes the human delegation," Vexith announced, his voice a pale shadow of its usual boom. "We have convened this emergency session to demand an explanation for the events in the Sol system. Representative Chen, your people have some explaining to do." In the center of the hall, a hologram of Representative Chen shimmered into existence. She stood life-sized in a plain dark blue uniform, unadorned with medals or ranks. She was a small woman with short hair and a face that was impossible to read. She had the calm demeanor of someone who knows they're holding a royal flush. "High Chancellor," Chen started, her voice perfectly level. "You say we have explaining to do. I disagree. We owe you nothing. But in the interest of preventing any future misunderstandings, I will offer one." The Thaxian counselor, picking his words as if walking through a minefield, voiced the question on every being's mind. "Representative, our intelligence indicated your species was centuries away from faster-than-light travel. You had no energy shields, no plasma weapons. How did you possibly defeat a fleet that had all of that technology and more?" Chen allowed herself a tiny, cold smile. "Counselor, that question highlights the fundamental mistake you all made about Earth. You scanned our technology and thought you knew our measure. You saw chemical rockets and nuclear fission and wrote us off as a primitive curiosity. You were catastrophically wrong." A timeline appeared beside her. 40 years ago, our radio telescopes picked up your signals, specifically Vorithian military comms. We heard you bragging about your conquests, laying out your battle plans. We learned two things that day. One, we were not alone in the universe. And two, it was a neighborhood run by a violent empire that treated emerging species like us as pests to be exterminated. A nervous shuffle went through the chamber. Many of the delegates had been right here in this room, nodding along as the council approved those Vorithian pacification campaigns. Chen continued, "The governments of Earth came together. For the first time in our turbulent history, every nation, every faction agreed on one single policy. We would not be next. We would prepare. We would be ready for the day the Vorithians showed up at our door, because we knew eventually they would." "You spent 40 years preparing for one battle?" a Draxian general asked, his voice full of disbelief. "How do you keep a secret that big?" "We went dark," Chen said. "We turned off every deep space transmitter. No more friendly greetings sent out to the cosmos. To the galaxy, it looked like we were just what you assumed. A backward race, playing with firecrackers in our own little corner of space. You had no idea what we were building in the shadows." The display shifted, showing mind-boggling images of shipyards carved into asteroids, bases hidden on the far side of the moon, and weapons platforms disguised among the rings of Saturn. "We dedicated 15% of our planet's entire economic output to a single, unified military project. Every nation contributed. We built our fleets where your long-range sensors would see nothing but rock and ice. We mined our system for every resource we could find. We trained generations of soldiers for a war we prayed would never come. All of it, designed from day one to be completely invisible to you. But your technology, Vexith blurted out, his voice cracking with desperation. Your weapons, they were kinetic slugs. They're ancient. They shouldn't have been able to even scratch our shields. Chen fixed her gaze on the shattered Vorithian delegate. We studied you, High Chancellor. For 40 years we listened. We analyzed every battle you ever fought. We dissected every piece of data you so arrogantly broadcast across the galaxy for everyone to see. Your ship designs, your shield frequencies, your armor composition, your tactical doctrines. You shouted your strengths from the rooftops, so proud of your power. She let that sink in. You handed us the instruction manual on how to defeat you. Your shields are designed to stop energy bolts, but they barely slow down a solid chunk of metal moving at a fraction of the speed of light. Your armor can absorb plasma, but it shatters like cheap pottery when hit with a massive kinetic impact. Your tactics rely on rigid, predictable formations. We used chaotic swarms. We never tried to beat you at your own game. We built the perfect counter to it. The Thaxian counselor spoke again, his voice now trembling. You mentioned kinetic weapons. To accelerate a projectile to 30% of light speed, the power required is astronomical. How could you manage that without advanced shielding to protect your own ships from the recoil and energy bleed? We don't use shields like yours, Chen said. We use something called ablative armor. It's crude, it's cheap, and it's effective. When your plasma cannons hit our ships, the outer layers simply boil away, absorbing the energy and protecting the hull. Simple. A lot of our technology is simple, Counselor. That's its strength. It's reliable, it's easy to build in massive numbers, and it doesn't depend on rare exotic materials. The display showed a human warship. It was ugly, blocky, and clearly built for function over form. Our ships are stubborn. They're built with layers of redundant systems. If one system gets knocked out, there are 3 more ready to take its place. If a component fails, you can hot swap a new one in seconds. Sure, they're not sleek or beautiful like your starships, but they work. And while you were busy polishing chrome, we were building thousands of them. It was like a light bulb went on in the chamber. An entire species, pushed to the brink, had secretly transformed their whole world into a weapons factory, and no one out here had the slightest idea. A delegate from a minor species called the Yark stood up, his voice trembling. Representative Chen, your methods were barbaric. You used your own ships as decoys. You sent your people on suicide missions just to take down one of our dreadnoughts. You gave no mercy and took no survivors. Is that just how your kind wages war? Chen's face was a stone mask, completely unreadable. Yes, she said, her voice flat. When we go to war, we intend to win. We couldn't care less about glory or so-called honor. We fight so we can see the next sunrise. Every single pilot who strapped into a cockpit for that battle knew they were probably on a one-way trip. They signed up anyway because they understood exactly what was at stake. If the Vorithians had won, Earth would just be another slave world. Our children and their children would have been born in chains. We made a choice. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the delegates from worlds that had already bowed to the Empire. I'm sure some of you see us as monsters, but consider this. We gave Admiral Kreth a way out. We warned him to turn his fleet around. But he just marched forward, completely convinced of his own superiority. He looked at us like we were primitives who would just roll over and surrender. He was wrong, and his entire fleet paid for his arrogance with their lives. The Draxian observer leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. But what about your stealth technology? How on earth did you hide thousands of ships from their deep-range sensors? Chen's reply was simple. Basic physics. We built our ships to run cold with almost zero emissions. We relied on passive sensors right up until the moment of attack. We hid our fleet where your scanners would never bother to look twice, inside the asteroid belt, among the rings of Saturn, even on the dark side of our own moon. We were right in front of you the whole time, disguised as space rocks and dead satellites. You were looking for powerful warships with shields blazing and weapons hot, she went on, a faint, cold smile on her lips. You weren't looking for quiet, patient hunters waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You thought your advanced tech made you invincible, but we had patience and strategy. We spent 40 years doing nothing but watching you, learning your every move. We became the galaxy's top experts on Vorathaean military doctrine without ever firing a single shot. By the time the first missile was launched, we already knew how you would react before you did. The High Chancellor Vexith's crimson eyes burned with a rage he could barely contain. You talk about self-defense, but you completely annihilated an entire armada. 12,000 Vorathaean soldiers died in that battle, he spat, and their only crime was following orders to expand the Empire. Chen turned to look him straight in the eye, her voice dropping to a freezing whisper. Their crime was trying to conquer our home. High Chancellor, they showed up at our doorstep with 800 warships and gave us two choices: surrender or be destroyed. They promised to turn our cities into glass if we fought back. What did you honestly expect us to do? Welcome them with open arms? Thank them for the honor of becoming your slaves? A thick, uncomfortable silence filled the great hall. Vexith had nothing to say. Chen continued, her voice tight with controlled fury. And let's get something else straight. For 40 years, we've been listening to your Galactic Council broadcasts. We listened to all 47 of you debate the Vorathaean expansion. We heard you call them subjugation operations. We watched you vote to formally absorb conquered planets into your empire, and not once, not a single time did we hear anyone object. Not one of you ever stood up and said that maybe, just maybe, the Vorathaeans should be stopped. Her gaze swept the chamber again, and one by one the delegates looked down, ashamed to meet her eyes. You all knew exactly what the Empire was. You watched them swallow world after world, and you did nothing. You were too afraid, too weak, or maybe just too comfortable to risk doing the right thing. So don't you dare stand there and lecture me about the lives we had to take to protect our freedom. You had 40 years to build something better than this empire. You just chose to live on your knees instead. The Thaxian counselor finally spoke, his voice barely audible. You're not wrong, Representative Chen. We should have done more. We should have resisted, but the Vorathaean Empire was just... It was too big. No single one of us could have stood against them. Then you should have stood together, Chen retorted, her tone cutting like a razor. There are 47 species on this council, billions of people on thousands of worlds. If you had united against them 3 centuries ago, the Empire never would have become the monster it is today. But you didn't. You chose a quiet life of submission over a freedom that was worth fighting for. She let her words hang in the air for a moment before her voice changed, becoming calm and firm. Earth will not make that mistake. We are not joining your council. We want no part of your politics. We will never again trust our survival to others. Effective immediately, we are claiming our solar system and a 50 light-year exclusion zone around it. Any vessel crossing that border without our explicit permission will be considered hostile and will be eliminated. There will be no warnings. There will be no second chances. 50 light years, Vexith sputtered in disbelief. That territory covers 17 star systems. There's no way you can defend a space that large. For the first time, a genuine, almost amused smile touched Chen's lips. Can't we, High Chancellor? You also thought we couldn't defend one little planet. You thought 800 warships would be more than enough to crush us. Tell me, how did that work out for you? She brought the star map back up, with a huge red sphere now marking the new human territory. For 40 years, all you saw in our system were primitive chemical rockets. You never saw the shipyards. You never found the weapon platforms. You never once suspected we were preparing for total war. What in the universe makes you think you know what we've been building in the star systems right next door? A chilling realization spread through the chamber. If the humans had built a secret war machine in their own system for 40 years, what could they have built in all that time in the surrounding systems? How deep did this rabbit hole go? We have automated defense platforms positioned throughout the entire exclusion zone, Chen stated matter-of-factly. They've been sitting there, silent and waiting, for the last 20 years. You never found them because you were never looking for them. These platforms have one very simple mission: destroy any unauthorized ship. They don't negotiate, they don't offer warnings, they just remove threats. She turned off the map and looked at the stunned delegates one last time. Humanity is now officially withdrawing from all galactic affairs. We don't want your trade deals. We don't want your alliances. We don't want your politics. We just want to be left alone. Stay out of our territory and you'll never hear from us again. Cross the line and you'll end up just like the Vorathayans. But what if we need your help? A small voice asked. It was the delegate from Plinix, a world the Vorathayans had conquered 200 years ago. What if new empires rise up to take their place? Now that the empire is weak, will you help us? Chen looked at the Plinix delegate, and for a split second, there was a flash of something like regret in her eyes. No. Earth's policy is isolation. We are not getting dragged into your wars. We are not your saviors. You have to save yourselves. Build your own ships. Make your own alliances. Create the peaceful galaxy you always claimed you wanted, but do it on your own. She softened her tone slightly. I'm sorry, but humanity has learned a very hard lesson. We can't trust anyone else to protect us. We can't rely on treaties or councils. The only security that's real is the strength you make for yourself, and for that reason, Earth is closed. The holographic image of Chen started to flicker. Right before she disappeared, she left them with one final thought. This is the first and the last official communication humanity will have with this Galactic Council. Don't try to call us. Don't send your diplomats or your cargo ships. And whatever you do, do not test the borders of our exclusion zone. We've said all we have to say. Just remember what happened to the Varathian 7th Fleet and stay away. The hologram vanished, leaving the council chamber in a deep, terrified silence. It had been 6 months since the 14-minute war, and the galaxy had been fundamentally broken. The Varathian Empire, the single greatest power in known space for 3 centuries, was in a state of total collapse. Imagine being on your knees for 140 years, only to suddenly be told you can stand. That's what happened the day the Vorathayan Empire's iron grip on the galaxy finally broke. With their terrifying 7th Fleet reduced to cosmic dust, the whole rotten structure began to collapse, and the first world to rise up was ours, Draxus. For generations, they tried to beat the warrior out of us, but they never could. The second we heard the news, we kicked their officials off our planet, politely of course, and declared our independence. We'd been hiding our old starship blueprints for over a century, just waiting for this day. And just like that, a wildfire of freedom started. Thaxia, Plen, Yulin, a dozen worlds followed, shouting they were free. For some, the occupiers just packed up and left. For others, the local Vorathayan garrisons made a last bloody stand, refusing to believe their empire was gone. The empire tried to fight back, of course. They sent ships to put down the rebellions, but it was like trying to plug 100 holes in a dam with 10 fingers. Their forces were stretched so thin it was pathetic. In just 3 months, half their territory was gone. The worlds that were left started fighting each other, with every ambitious commander claiming he was the true emperor now. The very species that had conquered 17 civilizations was now busy tearing itself to pieces from the inside out. And the Galactic Council? Total joke. They were already a laughingstock for not seeing the humans coming, and this just finished them off. Nobody even bothered showing up to meetings anymore. The council station, once this grand symbol of unity, became a ghost town. The few politicians who still came just sat around blaming each other while the galaxy burned. I heard the Thaxian counselor gave a speech to a room of empty chairs. He said, "We failed. We let the Vorathayans build an empire of fear, and we called it stability. We called it peace. But it was a peace held together by a gun. And the second someone stared down the barrel of that gun and won," he said, "the whole thing came crashing down." A Draxian military observer in the back of the room just nodded. "It's an arms race now," the observer said. "Every species is building warships, studying what the humans did, trying to figure out how they broke the most powerful military in the galaxy. Everyone's scared they're going to be the next one on a conqueror's list. The Thaxian just sighed. Can you blame them? The humans taught us two things. A big fleet means nothing without a brilliant strategy, and the only person you can truly count on is yourself. After Earth taught the galaxy that brutal lesson, a strange, heavy silence fell. Nobody trusted anyone, least of all the Council. How could they have missed a power like humanity brewing right under their noses? The Draxian ambassador had no answer. While everyone else was panicking and pointing fingers, the human sector went completely dark. A 50 light-year do not enter sign was posted around their system, and nobody was stupid enough to cross it. Our long-range sensors saw things happening near their sun. Massive shapes were being built in Jupiter's orbit. Weird energy pulses were coming from Saturn. An entire civilization was buzzing with activity, but not a single ship so much as poked its nose past their border. The whispers started. Were they building giant ships to run away from the chaos? Were they making planet killers to hold us all hostage? Or were they working on something so new, so powerful, that it would make their last victory look like a temper tantrum? The scariest part? No one knew, and no one was dumb enough to go find out. Well, almost no one. A small survey ship from the Planth species made that mistake. They were looking for new homes and drifted just a little too far, about 51 light years from Earth. There was no warning, no turn back now, just a flicker in the void as hidden defense platforms woke up and shredded their ship with railgun slugs. All 37 people on board vanished in a flash. The message was loud and clear. Earth wasn't playing. Stay out, for good. Over on Vexith, one of the shattered remnants of the old empire, the remaining military leaders were in a full-blown panic. They'd lost contact with 17 fleets. Their economy was in a death spiral. A vicious civil war was burning through what little they had left. But the thing that truly kept them up at night was Earth. What's to stop them from coming for us? One commander asked, his voice trembling. What if they see how weak we are and decide to finish the job? They won't, sighed Admiral Thraxus, one of the few top dogs to survive the political mess after the 7th Fleet's destruction. The humans were perfectly clear. They want to be left alone. As long as we stay out of their space, they have no reason to bother with us. But what if the Draxians come for payback? Another commander snapped. Will the humans help us then? Thraxus actually laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. Help us? Did you not listen to Representative Chen's broadcast? She said Earth will not interfere in galactic politics. We're on our own. We dug this grave when we underestimated them, and now we get to lie in it. He pulled up a star chart, and a huge red sphere glowed where human space was. That 50 light-year bubble wasn't just a border. It was a declaration of independence from the rest of us. The humans didn't just win a war, Thraxus said, his voice low. They proved you don't need alliances to be safe. They proved you can go it alone. And now, everyone else was scrambling to learn that same lesson. But in the quiet darkness of space, far from any spying eyes, a secret meeting was happening. 7 different species, including us Draxians, had sent representatives to a hidden ship. Our own governments didn't even know we were there. We were calling ourselves the Liberation Coalition, and we were planning to build a better future. Our delegate spoke first. We all know why we're here. The Varathian Empire is dead. The Galactic Council is a joke. And humanity proved that real safety comes from strength. But we can't all be Earth. We don't have 40 years and a unified planet to prepare. So we do it together, the Thaxian representative said. We combine our resources, share our technology, and build a defensive alliance so tough that no one will ever get the bright idea to start another empire. But what about the humans? The Plen delegate asked nervously. What if they see a new alliance as a threat to them? Then we prove them wrong, our Draxian said. We show them with our actions that we respect their border. No flybys, no spy drones. We make it obvious that we want the same thing they do. Peace and the right to forge our own path. Over the next few months, the Liberation Coalition quietly grew. More worlds joined, sharing ship designs and coordinating production. We started using human tactics, small, automated defense stations, and simple, tough systems, instead of the fancy, fragile tech the Empire loved. We studied the Battle of the Sol system like it was a holy book, trying to understand every piece of their genius. But we did one thing the humans never did. We learned to trust each other. We shared everything, building an alliance based on cooperation, not conquest. We were becoming what the Galactic Council only ever pretended to be, a true partnership of equals, sworn to mutual defense. Back on Earth, Representative Chen watched the Galactic reports stream into the Unified Defense Command Center. The galaxy is resetting, her intelligence chief reported. The Vorathian Empire is history. Their old territories are locked in civil wars, and about 15 species have formed their own little alliances. The biggest is this Liberation Coalition. Sir, they're using our strategies. Good, Chen said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Let them learn. Let them stand on their own. That's what we wanted, isn't it? A galaxy of free peoples, not a collection of slaves. But what if they get strong enough to be a threat to us? A general asked. What if they unite everyone against Earth? Chen just smiled. She pulled up a new screen, showing the incredible boom of human industry. Cities floating in orbit, asteroids being hollowed out for resources, fusion plants powering the moons of Jupiter, and shipyards, bigger than any the galaxy had ever seen, building the next generation of human power. The lesson was for them, the future was for humanity. Let them try, she said, her voice as cool as deep space. It took us 14 minutes to dismantle the Vathayan 7th Fleet, and that was with hardware we designed 40 years ago. Do you really believe we've been idle for the last 6 months? Do you think we just stopped getting better? She widened the display to the system's edge, showing ship concepts with revolutionary drives and weapons that made their legendary fleet look like museum pieces. The Vorathayans made a fatal error, Chen explained. They assumed the war would be won by the side with the fanciest toys. But victory goes to those who prepare better, fight smarter, and simply refuse to be beaten. We spent 4 decades preparing for the Vorathayans. We've spent the last 6 months getting ready for whatever comes next. A junior officer spoke up, his voice hesitant. Ma'am, begging your pardon, but some worry we're planning for the wrong kind of future. The galaxy isn't just chaos anymore. New alliances are taking shape, better ways of doing things. Maybe it's time to end our isolation. We could help them. Chen faced the young man, and a bit of the ice in her eyes melted. I understand that impulse, I truly do, but our policy exists for a very good reason. The moment we dive into galactic politics, we paint a giant target on our backs. Every other power will either want to use us as a shield or try to tear us down. We'd get pulled into one conflict after another, forced to choose sides and shed our blood for problems that aren't ours. She walked over to the viewport, looking down at the beautiful swirl of blue and green that was Earth. Our own people spent centuries slaughtering each other over lines on a map, different gods, and patches of dirt. We nearly torched this entire world with our own weapons. It took a threat from the stars to finally get us to act as one. That unity is the most valuable thing we have, and it's delicate. We can't afford to see it crack by getting mixed up in the galaxy's endless wars. So we just stand by? The officer asked, his voice barely a whisper. We watch while they might get crushed under the heel of some new empire, and we do nothing? We do a lot more than nothing, Chen corrected him gently. We protect us. We hold on to our strength, our freedom. We serve as living proof that a species can make it in this hostile universe by relying on itself. We're leading, not by giving orders, but by showing them what's possible. You don't need to build an empire to be safe. You just need the will to build your own walls and the power to defend them. She leaned back, her eyes scanning the data flowing across the main display. Now look at this, she said, her tone calm. Out at the edge of their self-declared border, something amazing was taking shape. 3 new alliances had formed in the last month, pieced together from the wreckage of the Vorathayan Empire. Species that had been bitter enemies for generations were now sharing technology, coordinating defense grids, and learning how to stand up for themselves. "It's working," she breathed. "They're finally learning." Her head of intelligence wasn't so optimistic. But for how long? Coalitions like these are built on shaky ground. What happens when old grudges resurface over a moon or a mining claim? Chen just shrugged. "Then they'll sort it out. That's not our business anymore. Earth has secured what it needs. The rest is their problem to solve." "We now hold 17 star systems," she reminded them, gesturing toward the holographic map. "That gives us more than enough space to expand for centuries to come. We have the resources, the territory, and the firepower to guarantee our independence. That is all that matters." She could see the doubt on some of their faces. "I know what you're thinking, that this is selfish. But consider the alternative. If we get involved in galactic affairs, how long before we're dragged into someone else's war? How long before they start seeing our fleet not as a shield for our home, but as a weapon to advance their own goals? Our founders were crystal clear on this," she continued. "We fight for our survival, not to create an empire. We protect what belongs to us and only us." By following that single simple rule, they would avoid becoming the very monsters they had just overthrown. They would never be another galactic superpower crushing others in the name of a false peace. As weeks turned into months, the galaxy started to mend itself without any intervention from Earth. The scrappy new Liberation Coalition expanded to include 23 species, becoming a legitimate power. The old Vorathaean warlords continued to fight among themselves, weakening each other. New trade routes hummed with activity, linking worlds that had been forbidden from communicating for ages. And through it all, Earth stayed completely silent, a ghost in the galactic network. No ships entered its space, and no messages were sent out. The humans had simply disappeared from the public stage, leaving the rest of the galaxy to guess what they were planning behind their silent frontier. Some saw Earth's withdrawal as a massive waste. With human strategy and power, a new, better galaxy could have been forged from the ruins. Others saw their isolation as the ultimate act of wisdom. By refusing to play the game, the humans could never be corrupted by it. But on one point, everyone was in agreement. The galaxy had been changed forever. The collapse of the Vorathaean Empire demonstrated that no one was untouchable. Earth's stunning victory proved that pure willpower and brilliant tactics could defeat superior technology every single time. And humanity's silent retreat showed that you didn't have to participate in the great game to survive. In the end, Earth achieved everything it had ever wanted, safety secured by its own might and peace secured by a very clear message. Bothering them was a deadly mistake. The galaxy learned to give that silent patch of space a very, very wide berth. And so, they learned to keep their distance. Back in the Unified Defense Command Center, Representative Chen allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she reviewed the latest intelligence. The plan had worked flawlessly. Earth was safe, humanity was free, the rest of the galaxy, for good or ill, was now on its own. "Ma'am," an aide interrupted, approaching her station. "It's the Liberation Coalition on the line again. Another request for diplomatic discussions. They're inquiring if we might consider sharing some defensive technology." Chen answered without a moment's thought. "Send the usual reply. Our stance has not changed. We appreciate their respect for our borders, but we have no interest in treaties or tech exchanges. Tell them to keep innovating," she added. "They've managed to get this far on their own." The aide gave a nod and departed. Chen returned her focus to the screen, watching the symbols of a civilization that was rebuilding, expanding, and strengthening itself in the quiet security they had fought for. Earth was closed for business, and it would remain that way indefinitely if needed. Because humanity had learned the harshest lesson the galaxy could teach. When it comes down to it, you can only rely on yourself. Alliances crumble, treaties turn to dust. The only thing that endures is the strength you forge with your own two hands. The Vorathaean Empire, a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries, was annihilated in 14 minutes. 14. About the time it takes to finish a cup of coffee. And that was a lesson the galaxy would never, ever forget. They would remember that Earth offered them one warning, and only one: stay away. And the galaxy, having finally gained a little bit of wisdom, did precisely that.